If you're looking for Easter basket ideas for a boy, but don't seem to find any, then look no further. This video is for you. Let me show you how I turned this ordinary basket into an extraordinary basket. Now let's have some fun. Welcome back and happy Easter. If you did not subscribe by now, I'd suggest you subscribe. So, a couple of days ago, I did an Easter basket for a girl. It was more arts and craft and activity based, not so much candy. So, I wanted to change it up and give you some ideas for a boy. This Easter basket has more candy and toys for a boy. So if you're looking for some ideas on what to put in your gift basket, this video is for you. So we have a lot of candy in it. We have trucks, Legos, ring toss, glow in the dark game, some egg decorating kits, a bubble gum, a bubble gun, and some more candy. So if you're going into the Dollar Tree and you need some ideas, check these out. See you soon. Okay, so getting to the gift basket, I wanted to create my own Easter bunny face. So I got a foam board, a blue foam board, and I traced out bunny ears and a cute face and created my own bunny rabbit face. I put glitter on the ears and I created my own face. So I hope you like it and I hope you'll try it. My bunny face was a success. I love the way it came out. I hope you'll try it. So we are going to continue with our gift basket. I wanted to place all of my tall items in the center of my basket. So I taped them together with skewer sticks so that it can elevate outside of my gift basket. I also applied skewer sticks to my bunny face so that it can elevate higher than the things in the gift basket. And keep in mind, when you're applying all of the items in the basket, make sure everything in the basket is visible so that they can see all of the amazing things that you chose to place in your basket. I promise you they'll love it, and make sure you put a lot of love into it. So, if you didn't subscribe by now, check the little hand sign at the right corner of the video and subscribe right now. And everybody that has been subscribed so far, I just want to give you a big thank you for supporting me and giving me the energy to do more of these amazing videos. So getting back to the gift basket, as you can see, I'm trying to align the things in my gift basket in a way where it's appealing and you can also see everything in the gift basket. So understand, you don't have to do it the way I did it. You can place the items where you choose to place it and just have fun with it, make it colorful, and have fun like I said before. And if you need any more tips, let me know what videos that you will want me to create for you. So the other videos, previously I wrapped my basket with cellophane. I will place them in the notes above so you can check those out if you're interested in doing cellophane wrap. I'm choosing to do shrink wrap this time, and it's just more of a neater look. So if you choose to do this, I will have it in the description below, all of the different sizes I chose, and you can choose the one that works for your gift basket. So let's get back to the basket. So I'm placing my basket in my cellophane shrink wrap pocket, and I make sure I placed it in the center so that everything will fit evenly. And being that this is an extra large shrink wrap bag, you will have excess on the sides of your gift basket. So what I did was just folded them to the back and slid them down on the bottom of the basket as well, taped them, and then started to use my blow dryer. You can use a heat gun, choose whichever one you have in hand. And also, when you're using the blow dryer, start from the bottom of the gift basket so it can start to tighten up the basket and helps to show everything in the gift basket a little more neater. And put your bow on it, and voila, your gift basket is done. Tell me what you think. I hope this video was helpful and gave you some ideas that you can add to your gift basket. I hope you have fun with me and will give it a try. Happy Easter, and make sure you like, share, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Comment below and tell me what you think. See you soon.